What's the worst thing you have ever done to an annoying neighbor? My dad was talking to our neighbor about what color he should paint the house and said, as a joke, well, I might as well paint the old one. House, blue, haha. The neighbor became almost angry and said stuff like, you cannot do that. A blue house? How stupid and annoying. How dumb, etc. And that's how I grew up, in a blue house. In our first house, my wife and I had a neighbor who disliked us from the start. Apparently the people that lived there before us were family friends who went through a divorce and we were the ones who bought their house. They were petty and mean to my wife, who doesn't like confrontation, parking across our driveway when she about to go to work, throwing pieces of wood over the fence, letting their dog crap on our lawn and not picking it up, etc. I tried talking to them a couple times too and was promptly told to F off. The husband loved his lawn care and used to brag about how it looked to everyone. So the next time it rained, I went out back and threw an entire box of OXO cubes into their backyard and let the rain melt them into the grass. Their dog absolutely destroyed their yard looking for the smell, and I would make sure to comment on it every chance I got. We moved shortly after. What are OXO cubes like? DPG treats. We lived in a neighborhood of townhouses. One neighbor let their dogs crap all over everyone's lawn and never picked it up. We tried asking them. We tried picking it up and putting it on their doorstep. They refused to do it. My one neighbor decided to get a piece of it and smear it all over the front of the house. After that, they started picking it up. I did something similar, except my neighbor left his car window down. I had a grocery bag full and put it in his car. This was in the summer. It was well over 100 degrees outside. His dog never pooped on my lawn again. When I was really young, our neighbor, Druggy, demanded we move our septic tank because he claimed it was partially on his property. He was a complete jerk about it and kept at it. My dad's a really laid back person. Eventually even he got mad and had the property line surveyed. Turns out not only was the septic tank on our property, not his, but the corner of his house and part of his driveway was actually on our land. Dad spent the next few months asking him when he was going to move his house off our land. I wonder if he legally could remove the section of house and driveway on his property. Not me, but my grandpa. My grandpa's neighbor's septic tank started leaking into my grandpa's backyard. He repeatedly asked his neighbor to fix the septic tank and clean up the mess in his yard. The neighbor completely brushed him off. So my grandpa took matters into his own hands. He rigged up a plumbing system in his yard. He installed an upright PVC pipe that pointed at the neighbor's backyard over the fence. I don't know how the system worked. I was only about 8 years old, in the early 90s, but it was set up to spray the neighbor's own septic waste over the fence and into the neighbor's beautiful and polished yard. And just like that, the neighbor fixed his septic tank. They remained enemies until my grandpa died a couple of decades later. I miss that old crazy bastard. Never pee off the grandmas and grandpas. They will get back at you in a way you'll never expect. My mom's neighbor called the city to demand they make my mom repair her fence that divided their yards. This lady has always been a crabapple for 10 plus years, but this move pissed my mom off. The fence did need a few mild repairs, which my mom would have done if the neighbor had just come talk to her. She was already in the process of getting quotes. The city contacts my mom and says you have to maintain your fence. My mom asks if she legally has to have a fence, and the person she talked to could sense where this was going. Turns out there are rules about maintaining a fence, but not requiring you have one. So my mom pays a contractor to tear it down entirely. The neighbor does come to talk to my mom and asks when the new fence will be built. My mom says, you want a fence? Build it yourself. Couple weeks later my mom has a nice new fence, courtesy of one annoying neighbor. A little petty, perhaps, but hilarious nonetheless. This is the grown-up version of your mom telling you to do the dishes while you were on your way to do the dishes. Not my story, but a friend of mine, let's call him John, had a neighbor, let's call him David, that would siphon gas out of everyone's vehicles. Nearly all of John's neighbors had cameras, so they knew who it was, but couldn't get the guy to stop. John went to the store to purchase a locking gas cap, and while they had a bit of a light bulb moment, he decided to buy one for David's car instead. John waited until he was asleep, about 9 AM. then installed the locking gas cap on David's car. Apparently, David flipped out and went door to door asking all of the neighbors he knew had cameras to tell him who did it. Miraculously, everyone's camera failed to work that day. John said the car sat up for about a week before David was able to remove it. After realizing how much his neighbors hated him, David decided to move. I had a terrible work schedule and had to wake up at 2:30 am to be at work by 4 am. My downstairs neighbors would blare loud music at all hours of the night, and I could feel the bass through my mattress. I went downstairs and politely asked them to turn down the music, and they seemed to kindly agree. As soon as I got back in bed, they turned it up even louder and kept it going until about 1:30 am. Before I left for work at 3:30, I turned over my amplifier so that the speaker was facing the floor, turned the volume up, and set my guitar on top of it. I left for my 12-hour shift, and the feedback was still screaming when I came home. Neighbors never blared their music again. Here to say that this exact situation has happened to me, and that is also exactly how I dealt with it. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. People don't always respond well to kindness. I decided to fence in my backyard and asked my neighbor if he would pay for half of the fence along his property line. He declined. I installed a fence around my backyard a few inches on my side of the property line. That neighbor then tied a new fence into my fence. He also tied into the neighbor's fence on the other side and the one behind his. So he only paid for about 40 feet of fence altogether and got his entire yard fenced in. Dong move. No big deal, even though he got a few extra square feet of backyard and a free fence on 3 sides for free. Some time later his dog knocked a hole in my fence. He asked me to fix it since his dog could escape to my yard and then into the neighborhood. I declined. I told him to fix it since it was my fence and his dog did the damage. He called code enforcement and the homeowners association. Turns out that if I have a fence I have to keep my fence in good repair. I repaired the fence and then painted the side of my fence that faced his property highliner yellow, blue, green, mixed with shades of black, crap brown. Turns out I get to choose the color of my fence as long as it is in good repair. He complained and was denied by the HOA. He then painted my fence. I had him change with vandalism and he was fined and had to repaint my fence the original terrible colors. He then bulk emailed the entire subdivision and complained, asking them to support him in his attempt to get me to paint my fence. Instead, the neighbor to his other side and behind him all painted their fences to match mine. He moved a few months later. Triple spite fence. He smeared his crap on my front door all because I was talking to his crush. Told the crush what he did and now he's known as the crap smearing pervert. Honestly, not even bad at all, just spreading true info. Friend had a neighbor who put in a very bright yard light that was pointed at her bedroom window. After a negative interaction when asking neighbor to more dim the light or such, cue theater stage hands. She put up a parabolic mirror pointed directly at dude's bedroom, used an old projector dowser, and an old lighting board to program a chase sequence that was hours long and repeated. End result was a beam of randomly blinking light that was aimed at neighbor's bedroom window. When he complained, she let him know that it was his light source and all he had to do was turn off his yard light. Freaking brilliant. My grandmother had a neighbor over her back fence who refused to help her repair the fence between their properties. It was still functional as a boundary line, but it was falling apart. Any conversation about fixing the fence ended with him saying that it was on her property, so it was her fence and therefore she was fully responsible, which was fair. She took a fall and was hospitalized for a few weeks. Upon her return, she found a new fence built an extra 5 feet into her property and a bill in the mail from the neighbor. He argued with her for months that she owed him, that the original fence was on his property and that where it was now was the boundary line. My grandmother got a surveyor surprise. The original fence was correct and the neighbor had taken 5 feet of her yard. At this point she was very old, frail, and tired of fighting her butthole neighbor. Instead, she let nature take over. She planted blackberries along the back fence and within 2 years it was covered. Every year, she'd walk the fence and throw seeds over because of course, it was still her yard. After 5 years of fighting, the blackberries had reclaimed her property. She's been gone for a few years now, but the blackberries remain, her way of haunting her neighbor. He's tried ripping up the ones on his side of the fence on numerous occasions, but the plants reseed themselves and grow back every year from her side. Only a grandmother would fight back with doing gardening. They assaulted my dad because he told them to stop yelling at a woman parked in the road, so I bided my time for a few weeks, then filled all the locks on their work van with super glue. If they had power locks with a remote, they won't know until it's an emergency, haha. Neighbor's dog kept crapping in the front, like they opened the front door, let him out, and he crap in our yard. I asked them like 10x to just clean it up, no problem. They outright refused, so for about 2 months I went out, picked it up, put it in a 5-gallon bucket outside in the backyard. When it was full of rainwater and crap, I walked over and dumped it on the front porch. It actually worked. They started cleaning up after the dog. We actually have been cool since then. Here's a modification to your story. If that were to ever happen again, do exactly what you said but lean it up against their front door, knock and run. This one's not my story, but my great-grandfather's. My great-grandfather was one of the last people in town to get indoor plumbing, and as such, had an outhouse in his backyard. Every year on Halloween, neighborhood kids would come into the yard and knock over the building and expose the cesspit. He got tired of it, so one year, the night before Halloween, he moved the building forward, then covered the fence with burlap, disguising it in leaves and grass clippings. In the dark, it was almost impossible to tell it was there. Halloween night, he sat in the outhouse and waited. It wasn't long after sundown when he heard a wet splat outside as a couple of kids fell into the muck. He lowered a ladder into the cesspit for them to leave after making them promise to never mess with his outhouse again. The kids honored their promise and even spread the word around the neighborhood not to mess with that outhouse anymore. I like your pappy. That's hilarious. Poured a bunch of boxes instant mashed potato powder on their lawn, so later when it rained they had a lawn full of mashed potato. If I could upvote both this and the P-Disc 1000 times, I would. In college I lived across from a frat house that would let people park in our spaces. Their router password was admin, so I logged into their router, banned all of their MAC addresses and changed the password. Never mess with a nerd who knows more about your crap than you do. Nice job. A friend of mine has a good one. She lived in a ground floor apartment with a patio that faced the street. Every apartment in the building had either a patio or balcony facing the same direction. One night she's outside on her patio having a glass of wine and relaxing, when a random dude she's never seen before comes walking down the street and rudely starts shouting at her. Dude explains that he lives across the street and the smell from her smoking cigarettes on her patio is bothering him. She explains that neither her nor her roommate smoke, so it must be coming from somewhere else. But this dude is adamant. She finally gets sick of being polite and tells him to leave her alone, and she goes inside. After that he harasses her constantly, yelling at her every time he walks or drives by, calling her a FB and insisting she is smoking. She wasn't, but even if she was, it's allowed by the complex, so there's nothing he could do about it. Sometimes he does it in the middle of the night, and it's so loud it wakes up my friend and other neighbors. From talking to other neighbors, she learns the guy is nuts, but he specifically hates women, and is probably targeting her because she is pretty and usually by herself. The last straw came when she was getting out of the shower and heard pounding on her patio door. The MF hopped her railing and was standing at the door peering through her blinds to yell at her. She gave her 30 days notice after that and moved. But once she in her new place, presumably where this guy wouldn't ever find her, she called me and asked for a favor. I worked at a bar at the time that had a big outdoor area. Lots of ashtrays out there to empty every night. I saved them up in a hefty bag for her every night I worked for like a month, and then gave her a super full bag. Apparently butthole guy's car didn't have AC or something, because she had noticed he left the windows partially rolled down at night sometimes. She snuck over to the dude's car in the middle of the night and dumped the entire trash bag of old cigarette butts into his car, handful by handful, making sure they got everywhere, and then drove home to her new apartment and never heard from the butthole guy again. Had a neighbor in my apartment complex that kept letting her huge dog take huge shoots in my yard space. Literally got to about 20 huge dog shoots sitting outside my window and I had enough. Put on a glove and picked up all the crap and dumped it on her doorstep. Left a note stabbed into the ground telling her to pick up her dog crap. She started picking up the crap and moved pretty soon after, lol. I was visiting my aunt a couple years ago in Arizona. She lives outside of Phoenix. Their next door neighbors had 3 or 4 kids who were super annoying. There was a brick wall dividing their backyards, as is common for the area. Upon my arrival, I find out that the kids next door throw things over the wall for fun. Not just like harmless twigs and pebbles, but like rocks and toys and garbage and even knives. My aunt's family had to keep their trampoline on the other side of the yard so it wouldn't get crap thrown into it. I asked my aunt about it and she said she talked to the parents, but they kept throwing crap. So that night I go online and file a police report with their address. Couple days later, the neighbors left a note at the front door with this long apology: "It won't happen again, blah blah blah." It pretty much stopped after that. Should have mounted the trampoline to rebound their throws. I put a spigot lock on our hose because she kept using my hose and flooding my flower bed in the process. The lady was pee. The rich brats next door were always throwing loud drunken parties when mom and dad went out of town for a few days, which was often. One Sunday morning I went out to find the corner of our lot, which was a school bus stop, littered with used condoms that had been left in the street or thrown into the grass. That night around midnight I gloved up and collected a bunch of them, then snuck into the neighbor's yard and scattered them around the pool, the garage, and the back door, where mom was sure to see them when she came home. There were no more parties. You wear a neighborhood condom. Proved 99% effective in preventing unwanted parties. In college, the guy in the dorm room next to mine was, apparently, a bit insane. He would bang on our shared wall whenever any noise happened. The first time he did it, I was just talking to a friend in my room at normal volume in the middle of the day. It kept going like this for months. He once banged on our wall for like 5 minutes because I sneezed. One day we noticed that he had a large pair of panties and a pair of earplugs taped to his door, with a note reading, "Put on your big girl panties and deal with it." Apparently his neighbors on the other side were sick of him, too. So one weekend, I was leaving the dorm for the weekend, and he started banging on the wall because I flushed a toilet. That was the last straw. I ended up putting a Britney Spears song on repeat, put my speakers up against his wall, and then left for the weekend, being sure to lock all the doors behind me. My parents have an extremely nosy neighbor who would just stand at the fence and watch what we do. I mean, with her nose resting on the top of the fence. This woman is 60s with kids and grandkids. I found out the other day my dad was in the garden with a shovel. Turns out he throws the slugs and snails in their trampoline and on their veggie plot for being annoying every time they aren't there. I couldn't stop laughing at how petty and hilarious this was. Still makes my day. Edit spelling. Her nose resting on the top of the fence. This is where you glove up one night, find some poison ivy and rub it all over the top where she snoops. See how much longer she pulls that crap after getting poison ivy rash up her nose. Upstairs neighbor was noisy late at night, like 2 AM. Music, loud footsteps. We had repeated conversations about it, but he blew us off, bought us earplugs and told us to deal with it. Unfortunately for him, the breaker box for the building was in our unit. A few tests later, with his friendly roommates who hated him just as much, we zeroed in on the breaker to his room and an unoccupied area. Guess who had strange power issues at night when being disruptive? They would miraculously resolve at 7 AM. He wasn't the brightest bulb in the box and never did suspect us. The landlord was aware of his disruptiveness and he was already on thin ice. We let him know not to call the power C regarding his issues and he was on board. After assaulting one of his roommates over an unrelated incident, his butt was kicked to the street at the end of the lease. My house is right on the corner of an area where the road turns into a T. I had issues with people cutting the corner and driving through my yard. One day someone dang near hit my dog. I went and bought a boulder, probably 300 or 400 pounds, and put right on the corner. Come winter and we had a bad snowstorm. Someone was coming through in a lifted Dodge and hit the boulder going about 20 and totaled the truck. Since then though, I've had zero issues with people. My favorite part of this is that boulder is capitalized, like it's a member of the family. I think I was the annoying neighbor this one time. I used to live in a townhome complex where the back porches were just slabs of concrete and there was a kind of field which joined all of them, which was little more than a drainage field. One night I had like 5-6 friends over and we were on the slab grilling some chicken wings and generally laughing and having a good time. Not too loud, no music, and we weren't trashed, but I imagine we were still audible to the other buildings. Woman from across the way starts hollering at us, being loud and threatening to call the cops. A few of my friends were like, frick that lady, but I decided to take a different route. I plated up about 8 wings with the scratch-made buffalo sauce which I'd invited everyone over to enjoy. I walked the food over to the lady on a paper plate and apologized for disturbing her. She told me she overreacted and was sorry for yelling at us. I told her it was okay, but told her I was concerned she'd probably had a crap day to be yelling at strangers for a little noise at 7 PM on a Friday. She did have a crap day. I told her I was sorry and that we'd keep it at a reasonable level as a courtesy to her. A little while later she yelled back over that those were the best wings she'd ever had, and we gave a little cheer back to her. Never heard from her again. Hope her days are better now. Please be my neighbor. I won't even yell at you, but if you bring me tasty wings, I'll bake you a pie. When I was a kid, the neighbor's dogs, large breed, keep using our front and backyard for a bathroom. We asked on multiple occasions for them to clean up the fesses. They gave us a bunch of attitude about it and eventually they made a half-assed attempt to clean up a small portions of it. Finally, after months of frustration and stepping in dog crap while mowing the grass, my dad cracked. He proceeded to pick up enough crap to fill a 5-gallon bucket, and then dumped all of it in their brand new grill and closed the lid. That put a stop to it real quick. Didn't realize how loud our home improvement projects were. Our units share a wall, and my neighbor works from home. Neighbor blew her top because she didn't know when the noise would end. Apologized with a gift basket of fruits and chocolate. Now we get along great. A lot of time communication is key. Prior to starting a project, just putting a note on the doors of those affected saying you will do this and estimate it will take X amount of time will go a long way to help. Did you know you can sign up for the Jehovah's Witnesses to come to any address to teach you about their religion? You're welcome. Or you can buy a cheap book from Scientology using a gift card in someone's name. Scientology doesn't have an unsubscribe option. Loud party neighbors, all the time till 4-5 in the AM. I would hijack their Bluetooth speakers and play aggressive P on full blast until they turned it off. Samuel L. Jackson Redding go the frick to sleep would have also been a hilarious choice. Neighbor had a bad habit of parking too many cars in our really small parking lot. There were only enough spots for 2 cars per apartment. 4 apartments total. They often had 3 to 5 cars parked. I always had to ask them to vacate our parking spots when we got home. Every day practically. The neighbor on the other side of me got their Pontiac stuck in the driveway because of the snow. They left it there overnight and come the next morning everyone needs to leave for work and whatnot. It's right in the middle of the driveway. I'm being yelled at by Pontiac neighbor and too many cars neighbor. I guess they both expected me to fix the situation with my truck. I told me BF at the time we were not helping either of them. They both went to him and asked if my truck could be used to get the car out. My truck number. I dug out enough of the snowbank to get out and let them deal with it. Both of the neighbors got in my face and were yelling before I even said no. So it was a definite no. I give 0 fricks if you're going to yell at me for an issue you created. 0 fricks. It was our neighbor's son, but at the neighbor's house, we had really small, very close together houses, and the son, 50ish years old, would get off work and come over and stay in the backyard drinking and smoking. Nothing terrible, that part didn't bother me. He would always invite a friend over and drink until they passed out while burning stuff. Usually really rancid stuff like old painted fences, garbage, whatever would burn. All the while blasting a rock station. They literally had an old stereo wired into speakers in the backyard. I had asked them several times not to burn stuff and to turn the radio down, but after hammering down a couple bud deletes they would be back at it. I was given a transmitter for my phone so I could listen to music in my car. This would essentially plug into the headset jack on my phone and I could set it on a specific radio frequency and then tune my car radio in and listen away. Well, I found out that it had a pretty good range, so I used it to tune into the neighbor's favorite station and play my own lineup of Britney Spears and other assorted pop songs. Sometimes I would just leave it to static to mix things up. I would only do this on days where I wanted to be out in the backyard or they were being unusually loud, probably around once a week. Outside of that I would just leave them be. But what was weird is on the days where I would mess with their radio, they would not go outside and didn't play a thing. The radio station they listened to was mostly classic rock, and I know of at least one other station they could have tuned into to get similar lineups. I would have messed with that one too, but I never had to. Once their fav station was offline, that was it for them for the day. Glad to say I moved away from there and have outstanding neighbors now. When I was 10 or so, an old lady yelled at my brother and I for sitting on her curb. And not just yelled, she really bitched us out. So we got the bright idea to have an estate sale for her. We got up at like 4 AM on Saturday morning and put up homemade cardboard garage sale signs we made with her address on them and early birds welcome in bold letters. We then sat on the curb a little down the street across from her house and watched people bang on the door for an hour or so. The best part is we didn't put a date on the signs, so if she didn't find all the signs, presumably people would keep showing up every Saturday. Estate garage sailing here is an aggressive sport. Sign. Starts at 8 AM. No early birds. Earbuds. Well, looks like we have to wait out front from 6 AM then. Pretty tame if you ask me, but in my old place I had upstairs neighbors who would smoke and then throw the cig butts off the balcony and onto my patio. I was on ground floor, so I used to just kick them over in front of their door. Same with garbage, they would just throw things over sometimes and instead of picking it up I would just kick it in front of their door. Had a neighbor who smoked and threw their butts into our garden. I would pick them up and throw them back over their fence. Stopped after a few times. Not me, but my mom. We have this neighbor that's basically a psychopath. She hates all animals, especially dogs, and is the type to smear hot pepper sauce wherever she sees the neighborhood stray cats roam on or near her property. Well, it's safe to say she was absolutely livid when we had 2 dogs for 3-ish years. They were decently well trained and only barked on command, but she was mad they were big and did their business in mom's completely fenced in backyard. So one day she calls the city and says we have multiple corpses in our backyard and rats that were feasting on them in the hopes that it would get our dogs taken away. My mom finds this out when a city health inspector randomly shows up at our door and insists on walking the property with a printed report in hand. We obviously have neither of those things on our property, and the nice inspector said he'd flag all future reports from the anonymous caller against us so we wouldn't get bothered again. Neighbor blows her cover 2-ish weeks later asking us if we had any special visitors lately and are we finally getting rid of our creatures. Anyway, the only thing psycho neighbor seems to love is her garden. It's solely potted plants and vines that she likes to try and grow into my mom's fence that is solely on mom's property line, which mom hates as neighbor has the tendency to reach over our fence to hack at our trees and bushes. Mom waits until neighbor is at a weekday church service on the day before we leave for a long weekend and dumps 3 bottles of Roundup into every single pot that this lady pushed against our fence. The plants all mysteriously died the Sunday after we left with no one to blame it on. Not only was neighbor completely mystified, but she seemed to take it as a divine sign and has tried to apologize to my mom and make up for her years of haggishness to all the other neighbors on our block ever since. Mom still refuses to speak to her though, and only one old lady neighbor agreed to be her friend, lol. My neighbor is a cop and his kids always would come over to my yard and throw rocks at my house, screech loudly, harass my chickens and leave their coop open, etc. I put up a no trespassing sign and they still showed up. I put up some wire fencing and they still showed up. There was nothing I could actually do to get them in trouble because they're above the law since their dad is the law. But luckily last year I worked at a Halloween store and so I put a rubber pig mask on the light post in my backyard and he doesn't let his kids over here anymore, lol. Out of the office you need a motion detector that makes pig noises when activated, too. Hahaha. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.